Hello and good evening and welcome all to this wonderful event here at Reid Hall. On behalf of Columbia University, I'm greatly honored to be here to celebrate tonight the rich and truly fascinating history of Reid Hall. My name is Wafa El Sadr, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Columbia Global, and I'm a professor at Columbia in medicine and public health. I'm going to tell you a bit about Columbia Global. It's an umbrella initiative that was established at the university a few years ago with the intent of bringing together several of the major global initiatives across the university, all of which are really are focused on two things. One is to foster intellectual and scholarly inquiry, and secondly, to try to tackle some of the most complex challenges that we face in the world today. And I'm very pleased to let you know that at Reid Hall here, two of these entities are situated right here at Reid Hall. One is the Global Center at Paris, one of 11 Columbia Global Centers around the world. And the second is the Institute for Ideas and Imagination. But in addition, also here at Reid Hall, we have undergraduate programs and Columbia's master's program in history and literature. Now, at Columbia Global, our motto is where thinking meets doing, and where inquiry meets practice, and vice versa. And we believe that the array of work that takes place in this wonderful space here in Paris is a living example of exactly that. From education and research to partnerships and events like tonight's, these offer a refuge, as well as all the way to offering a refuge for displaced scholars. So this place really brings to life the whole idea of bringing thinking and doing together. And we're here also today to celebrate women and the contributions of women, and I think this makes it a very special event for me personally. Of course, we go back to Elizabeth Mills Reed, the American philanthropist who purchased Reid Hall in 1911, to her daughter-in-law, Helen Rogers Reed, president of the International Herald Tribune, and the Barnard alumna who gifted Reid Hall to Columbia University in 1964, to the myriad of women that you'll hear about today who have contributed throughout its 60 years history. And to make this place such a hugely vibrant and vital place here in the midst of this wonderful city. So I welcome you all tonight for a very exciting program, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce the next speaker, who's Brunhilde Biebuyck. And of course, Brun is the director of Reid Hall and the Paris Global Center. Now, for those of you who may not be aware of it, Brun started working at Reid Hall 40 years ago. She's been here for 40 years, 4 decades. In 1984.
I want to say that I was 5 years old.
Yeah, she was a baby. She crawled through that entrance and got a job here. But she's been here for 40 years, which is rather remarkable. We celebrated this earlier this year. And over these 4 decades, she has embraced Reid Hall's evolving mission over the years with amazing, truly unflagging spirit, helping to steer it forward, but always, steer it forward with great ambition, but always cherishing and really working in every possible way to preserve its heritage and its history. So it's especially honorable for me today. I'm honored to really introduce Brun to begin the program tonight. And thank you, Brun, for all your service to Columbia University for 40 years. Okay.
That was really nice. Thank you very much, Wafa. Except for the age part. So I have to turn on my computer so I can look at my notes. And this will happen in 2 seconds. Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to see so many people who are interested in our history. This is so great. Thank you for coming. So, the glasses. The impact of Reid Hall on French-American educational exchange and international relations cannot be overstated. Yet few studies have highlighted the fundamental importance of this place for France, other European countries, and the United States. More than just a set of buildings between 4 Rue de Chevreuse and 5 Rue de la Grande Chaumière, what is now known as Reid Hall has served as an innovative and dynamic space for women in the arts, university scholars, and study programs from the US and Europe. Year after year, it has welcomed students and faculty, building strong partnerships with French educational and cultural institutions, contributing not only to France's economy, but also to its cultural and academic landscape. Prior to its educational mission, what is now known as Reid Hall has continually shape-shifted in response to changing times. It began as a porcelain factory from 1750 to 1823, and later served as a residential orthopedic center from 1824 to 1834, transitioning into a Protestant boys' school from 1834 to 1892. At the turn of the 20th century, 4 Rue de Chevreuse began its transformation into a French-American center, primarily led and supported by women. Initially dedicated to women artists, it served as a hospital for French and American soldiers and the Red Cross from 1914 to 1922. In the last 6 months of 1918 alone, 1,524 patients were admitted to Reid's hospital. Subsequently, it became an international hub for women scholars. Then, during World War II, it welcomed the displaced students of the École Normale Supérieure des Jeunes Filles de Sèvres. After the war, it evolved into a center for American university students and was ultimately gifted to Columbia University. This multifaceted French-American journey was deeply rooted in the philanthropic vision embraced by prominent figures of American society, many of whom were wealthy women dedicated to education, research, and public dialogue. While the existence of Reid Hall is owed to countless such women, 2 in particular stand out. Elizabeth Mills Reid, a notable philanthropist whose enduring contributions were recognized in 1928 when the property was renamed Reid Hall in her honor. And Helen Rogers Reid, her daughter-in-law, who continued the family's patronage after Elizabeth's death in 1931, and who gifted Reid Hall to Columbia University in 1964, hence 60th anniversary, right? I will only focus on Elizabeth Mills Reid and the first pioneering initiative she established at 4 Rue de Chevreuse, the American Girls Art Club. Marie-Louise Taylor, Elizabeth's great-great-granddaughter, here with us, will offer a more intimate biographical perspective on both women. Born into wealth, Elizabeth Mills Reid later followed her financier father's philanthropic footsteps by founding hospitals and nursing schools and supporting numerous initiatives led by the American Red Cross. She married newspaper magnate and diplomat Whitelaw Reid, named U.S. Ambassador to France in 1889. When she came to Paris with her family, Elizabeth rekindled her love for the city she had known in her youth. Through friends at Paris's Church of the Holy Trinity, now the American Cathedral in Paris, she discovered that American women artists often led lonely lives in isolated Parisian garrets far from the comforts of home. Reid thus resolved to establish a residence that would ensure a home-like atmosphere, shield women from the bohemian demi-monde, and connect them to artistic networks. She then learned that 4 Rue de Chevreuse, formerly home to a Protestant boys' boarding school, was available for rent. Reid saw it as the ideal location for women artists, nestled in what was then known as Montparnasse's American Corner, already in those days, amid a vibrant artistic community. So in 1893, she rented the school, repurposed the whole school in order to meet the needs of women artists, and founded the American Girls Art Club, reserved for women in the visual arts. With Reid's support, the club attracted a wide circle of prominent French and American figures in the arts, academia, and society, and welcomed more than 1,000 residents over its 21-year existence. Most residents of the Girls Art Club were wealthy, white Protestant women in their 20s or 30s, many of whom remained unmarried throughout their life. Most were painters or etchers, though some broke with conventions by choosing to pursue sculpture. Before their Parisian sojourn, these artists had trained at progressive U.S. art institutions like the Art Institute of Chicago and the Art Students League of New York. Encouraged by their male teachers, many of whom had studied in France, they funded their trips through scholarships, family support, or earnings from teaching or selling art. For these women, studying in Paris, the art capital of the world, promised exposure to renowned artists in schools. Additionally, the relatively progressive attitudes on gender and sexuality granted women the creative freedom to pursue unconventional paths. Furthermore, the city offered easy access to other French towns. Many thus refined their skills in summer retreats in Giverny, Étretat, or Pont-Aven, while nearby towns like Cercy-en-Brie, Moret, and Grès-sur-Loing, Fontainebleau, Barbizon also provided settings for painting excursions. Additionally, Paris's central location in Europe enabled travel to Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, and as far as Morocco and Algeria. Some even ventured to Japan, drawn by its aesthetic traditions and design techniques. Despite their education and the relative openness of the French art world, however, women often had to defend their artistic legitimacy. Their work was frequently dismissed as a hobby and confined to feminine subjects like flowers, gardens, domestic scenes, or portraits, while sculpture remained stereotyped as a male occupation. Seeking validation and support, many women joined all-female organizations, and the Girls' Art Club served as one such vital space. It provided a convivial atmosphere, complete with affordable accommodations, salons and art studios, several gardens, a dining room, a reading room with a lending library and information bureau, and even a small Episcopal chapel. The club also organized gatherings where members could socialize, listen to speeches, and enjoy entertainment. A highlight was the daily tea, which attracted prominent figures from the French and American community. Above all, the club benefited from its proximity to the progressive art academies that had emerged in and around Montparnasse. Rejecting traditional academic styles, these schools emphasized experimentation with life drawing and plein air painting. Most significantly, many welcomed women, mainly in all-female classes, a stark contrast to the École des Beaux-Arts, which only admitted a limited number of women beginning in 1897. And at that time, I think there were 4 women who were admitted to the École des Beaux-Arts. So in these academies, aspiring artists worked with live models of both genders and received technical and critical guidance from renowned artists, primarily men. These instructors were well connected in Parisian art circles and often introduced promising students to galleries, exhibitions, and patrons. Some even proposed private lessons in their own studios. The Grande Chaumière and Colarossi academies, situated just behind the club, facilitated convenient access to art classes. Additionally, residents could hire models directly from the nearby models market for private posing sessions outside of class. And of course, the neighborhood Luxembourg Gardens was a favorite spot, especially for plein air painters and sketchers. The Louvre Museum was also within walking distance, allowing residents to hone their skills by reproducing works of the old masters. More importantly, the club hosted annual 2-week exhibitions through the Women's Art Association, which drew American women from across Paris. Between 1893 and 1914, over 30 such exhibitions featured 100 to 200 painters, etchers, and sculptors, with opening events attracting up to 500 people. Scheduled before the Parisian salons, these exhibits offered women an opportunity to showcase and sell their work while connecting them with influential figures in the art world, gallery owners, critics, salon organizers, and journalists, most of whom were men. In an era of gender bias that often restricted women's access to resources and prospects for growth, the club was thus not just a safe haven. Rather, it was a vibrant and supportive community of like-minded allies, and an invaluable space that enabled women to build professional networks, gain visibility in the art world, and support one another in navigating a male-dominated field. For many artists at the Girls Art Club, the experience was transformative. They expanded their portfolios, exhibited in galleries, gained acceptance into prestigious Parisian salons, and even sold their work. Travel further enriched their creativity, exposing them to diverse cultural traditions, artistic styles, and subject matters. Many formed lifelong friendships with their peers, forging bonds that shaped both their artistic and personal lives. Some stayed in France for years, while others returned to the US after 2 or 3 years, bolstered by the credibility and success they had gained in Paris and beyond. Back home, these women built thriving careers, exhibiting their work in galleries and major expositions, joining or founding influential art groups, and seeing their creations acquired by collectors, government officials, public gardens, and museums. The lessons and inspirations they brought back became foundational to the evolving art communities back in the United States, where significant shifts in the creative world were beginning to take shape. While some never returned to France or Europe, others returned regularly throughout their career, drawn back by the cultural and creative opportunities they had initially been inspired by here. Despite their contributions to art movements and successes in major exhibitions and societies, many of these women artists have had their legacies fade over time, with some falling into complete obscurity. Often overshadowed by male counterparts, they are frequently overlooked in galleries, museums, and academic studies. Consequently, their impact on the art world remains largely unrecognized. And when they are unearthed from the past, their time at the Girls' Art Club is rarely mentioned. Yet, as we have seen, Reid's first initiative at 4 Rue de Chevreuse proved to be highly successful. Unfortunately, it ceased operations with the onset of World War I. Though she did not directly manage the American Girls' Art Club, Reid demonstrated her deep commitment to the arts by generously funding the club's activities. But she even went further. After inheriting a substantial fortune from her father in 1910, she purchased the property, along with its adjoining lots, thereby expanding the footprint of 4 Rue de Chevreuse. In 1911, Reid also decided to commission the construction of a new building on site. She appointed French-American architect Charlie Knight, who would later design the American Hospital in Neuilly and the Foyer International des Étudiantes on the Boulevard Saint-Michel. Completed in 1912, the new building, now home to the Columbia Institute for Ideas and Imagination, increased the club's accommodations by 20 new bedrooms, 7 art studios, and a rooftop terrace, which he later replaced with a 4th story. Reid also asked Knight to design a library and exhibition room, the very space we are in this evening, today's renovated Grande Salle Ginsberg-Leclerc. In addition, she requested the construction of a small clinic, now a classroom, to grant free medical care to American students in the Latin Quarter. The complex of buildings we enjoy today are all Reid's doing, a lasting testament to her vision and dedication. Beginning with the Girls' Art Club, she ultimately paved the way for thousands of other women, thought leaders, artists, activists, educators, and administrators who worked, spoke, or created within the walls of Reid Hall. Their story often remains untold or overlooked. But in their day, these women were catalysts for change, willing to cross both disciplinary and national borders. Women who were not passive creatures of history and institutions, but active creators who forged parallel power structures. Our website honors the legacy of the Reid family and the women who shaped Reid Hall's unique spirit, ensuring that their accomplishments in the realm of cultural and educational exchange are rightfully recognized. And that's it for me. Thank you. So please now welcome Marie-Louise Taylor, who will speak to you about her great-great-grandmother and her great-grandmother.
Bonsoir, everyone. Thank you, Brune and team, for generously hosting us tonight. I am Mary Louise Taylor, and I'm honored to be here tonight to mark the 60th anniversary of my great-grandmother, Helen Rogers Reid, donating Reid Hall to Columbia University. When you sit inside a building such as this, one that has been so instrumental to the university's history in Paris, I think it is only human to be curious about its origins. Tonight, I don't intend to give you a monotoned history lesson on my family tree. I would like to invite you to have a personal look into the tattered photo albums, the personal letters, the values, and the coveted family lore of two powerful women, Elizabeth Mills Reid and Helen Rogers Reid, and how they are responsible for all of us sitting in this room together tonight. Though this mother and daughter-in-law pair were ardently disinterested in praise and attention, it is my conviction that their service left an unmistakable mark on American and French society during the 20th century. I will start this story off on January 6, 1858, when a baby was born in a hotel room in New York City to Darius Ogden Mills, a famed gold rush pioneer who later became one of the wealthiest men in California, and his wife, Jane Templeton. Their daughter, doctors told the parents, weighed only 2 pounds and was not expected to live through the night. Her father, Darius, wouldn't accept this news, choosing instead to take matters into his own hands. Darius packed his newborn daughter into a cigar box and surrounded her little body with cotton wool. He watched over the baby, willing her to survive. And despite the doctor's grim predictions, Elizabeth Mills did survive. Throughout her life, Elizabeth marveled over the fact that she had defied medical reason, so much so that 70 years later, when she was reading a California newspaper, she stumbled upon a story about a baby that was born weighing a mere 2 pounds and 13 ounces. She immediately wrote to the baby's father and assured him that his child was going to be okay. For if she had been able to survive, despite the nascent medical field of the mid-1800s, she was confident the baby had more than a fighting chance given recent medical advancements. She then had the baby brought to Mills Memorial Hospital and sponsored his treatment. Fortunately, through her generosity, the baby survived. Tonight you'll hear about my great-great-grandmother Elizabeth's philanthropic contributions, most of which were related to medical aid and public health. One might assume that Elizabeth's close encounter as a newborn might have spurred her interest in medical philanthropy. But from accounts of those who knew her personally, her endeavors seemed to be ignited by her compassion. Mills Memorial Hospital, for example, where she sent the newborn baby to receive life-saving treatment, was founded by Elizabeth in honor of a close friend who had lost 2 children to illnesses due to inadequate medical care in the area. The San Mateo Times would later claim the hospital to be one of the finest hospitals in the country, with Elizabeth donating more than $500,000 in her later years, which is equivalent to around $12 million today, to continue to grow the hospital and ensure proper care for patients. As previously mentioned, her father's wealth catapulted Elizabeth to the upper echelon of both New York and California society. She married Whitelaw Reid, a man who bootstrapped his way from humble beginnings into an ambitious newspaperman and politician. He was appointed ambassador to France under US President Benjamin Harrison in 1889. Elizabeth was fascinated by her husband's work and saw to it that she was well informed on the issues that crossed Whitelaw's desk. He often consulted her before every important decision. When they were separated, he would write to her at least once a day, affectionately calling 5-foot Elizabeth my little wife. Given their close collaboration, Elizabeth was privy to one particular project that Whitelaw was working on, an initiative to begin an arts organization in Paris for men. She asked herself, why shouldn't the women in Paris get the same opportunity? As she often did, Elizabeth took matters into her own hands and leased 4 Rue de Chevreuse, turning it into a center for women of the arts. Elizabeth was known for being hands-on with her philanthropic endeavors, with no details spared from her perfectionist eye. I'm told she employed the same strategy with 4 Rue de Chevreuse, much to the chagrin of the employees, throughout its various iterations, from the Girls' Art Club to the Red Cross Hospital, and then when it finally turned into the American University Women's Club in 1922. When she wasn't devoting her time to philanthropy, Elizabeth supported her husband in his role as ambassador to France. Together, the couple threw parties at their Paris home that were documented by the press as being elaborate and ostentatious. By the time her life crossed paths with that of Helen Rogers Reid, she was in every sense of the word the embodiment of high society. Helen Miles Rogers was born in Appleton, Wisconsin in 1882 as the youngest of 11 children. When she was 3 years old, her father tragically passed after developing blood poisoning, now known as sepsis, from a cut on his finger, leaving her mother to provide for all 11 children all on her own. Though he had left money behind to provide for the family, in a wicked turn of events, a close friend stole from their safe deposit box and skipped town, leaving them destitute. The Rogers' dire financial situation was likely a reason that Helen was raised in a no-nonsense household. Raised by her devout Episcopalian mother, Sarah, and her perfectionist sister, Minnie, who was 25 years her senior, Helen was taught to value education and hard work. Her older brother, Reverend Benjamin Talbot, who worked at a local boarding school, took notice of Helen's precocious intelligence and felt it needed to be fostered in a rigorous environment. As such, he pulled strings to allow for Helen to attend the local boarding school on a full payment deferred scholarship. When Helen ultimately was accepted into Barnard College in New York City, it was Benjamin who helped pay her tuition. It should not go unsaid, however, that Helen worked tirelessly to cover the funds of her tuition. She worked many jobs at Barnard, ranging from a summer assistant housekeeper to tutoring students in Greek to running all the clerical work, accounts, and payroll for the Barnard dormitories. When her family was unable to pay the tuition for her senior year, she turned to the Dean of Barnard for help. Out of sympathy for Helen's plight, Dean Laura Drake Gill bent the rules and produced the necessary sum out of Barnard's funds. The only condition was that Helen was to pay it back when she was able. Helen never forgot the generosity of the dean and vowed to someday repay her debt to Barnard tenfold. On the night of Helen's senior ball, Janet McCook, a Barnard alumna and friend, sent Helen a telegram. She said that Elizabeth Mills Reid was looking for a social secretary and wanted to know if Helen would be interested in applying. Eager to find a job that would keep her in Manhattan post-graduating from Barnard, Helen applied. 2 days later, Janet brought her to the Reid's house on Madison Avenue to be interviewed. From her letters, "Mrs. Reid took me up to her den," she penned to her sister Florence, "which is perhaps larger than the entire first floor of your house. They say she can be perfectly beastly to people, but she was lovely to me." On June 6th, Helen received a letter in the mail that the job was hers if she wanted it. That October, Helen began working for Elizabeth, her primary responsibility being managing all of Elizabeth Reid's affairs from her social calendar to her checkbook. She would work either from their house on Madison Avenue or at their Westchester castle called Ophir Hall. On her first day at Ophir Hall, Helen described her lunch with Mrs. Reid. "My sense of humor almost got the better of me in the dining room. It is a massive room with beautiful old portraits. The table was huge and we two were alone. We had a butler apiece, and unless I had added a little muscle recently in polishing floors, I never could have lifted the silver." I'm going to be very fond of Mrs. Reid. There is so much to learn from her, and she is a woman of a great good sense and a better heart, and best of all, she is ever so democratic. When Whitelaw was appointed as ambassador to Great Britain under Teddy Roosevelt, Helen went with the Reids to Dorchester House in London to continue to manage Elizabeth's affairs. Under Elizabeth's tutelage, Helen learned the ins and outs of New York and London society and politics. It allowed her a front row seat into the underworkings of the political world. When the Reids hosted King Edward VII, it was Helen who arranged the event. Not only did Elizabeth expose Helen to high society, she also introduced Helen to her son, Ogden. Believing dutiful Helen to be a good influence on her son, Elizabeth encouraged the pair to spend time together, to go to the theater, the opera, and the park. Despite Helen's best attempts to avoid it, the two began to develop feelings for one another. However, after a few months, Elizabeth pulled Helen aside to tell her that she did not condone the two becoming romantically involved. Helen, ever the rule follower, vowed to herself that she would steer clear of Ogden Reid. In the face of his mother's alleged disapproval, Ogden was undeterred, deciding instead that he was, in fact, going to marry Helen Rogers. He peppered her with marriage proposals until she said yes. Shockingly, when Ogden shared the news of their engagement, Elizabeth Reid was thrilled. In a letter to Helen, she wrote, "I could not write to you before leaving New York as I felt too excited by Ogden's news to settle down to letter writing. I love you very dearly and will be glad to have you a daughter. You have almost seemed like one to me in the past." In contrast with Elizabeth's approval, Whitelaw felt that Helen was too strong a personality for Ogden. Many years later, when Elizabeth told Helen's niece the real reason for her husband's opposition, she added, "But I was always in favor of it." The pair married in March 1911. Marrying into the Reid family came with its obvious material perks: a townhouse in Manhattan and a country estate in Westchester equipped with a full staff of butlers and maids, 2 personal automobiles just for Helen, and enough diamonds and silver to satisfy any woman in high society. But it was not the money itself that brought Helen joy. As someone who had toiled for the better part of 3 decades to make ends meet, her marriage to Ogden Reid and the financial security it offered must have brought a great deal of psychological levity to Helen. With the anxiety of finances alleviated, Helen could finally focus on what mattered most to her. So it should come to no surprise that Helen Rogers Reid was committed to advancing rights of women. Not only was she raised in a single mother household, her oldest sister Minnie had a strong conviction that women were equal to men and should play an active role in their community, which were progressive ideals for the late 1800s. Her experience at Barnard only amplified the values upon which she was raised. Though she was involved in many advocacy groups for women, there is one that defines her tenacious spirit. Helen joined an organization called the Empire State Campaign Committee, a group that dedicated itself to supporting the suffragist referendum in the election of November 1915 that would allow women the right to vote in New York. She shared the belief that by obtaining the right to vote, women would be one step closer to achieving equality in society. Helen was once quoted as saying, "The world needs its women more today than ever before. Hydraulic engineers grow hysterical over the wastage of water power in our unharnessed mountain streams. Conservationists are constantly excited about the statistics that show us devouring our forest 4 times faster than we are growing them. But what about the wastage of women's brain power?" Helen was nominated to the Press and Publicity Council of the Empire State Campaign Committee. In this role, Helen worked closely with Vera Whitehouse, an esteemed woman of New York society. Through Helen and Vera's tenacity, they were able to place advertisements for the suffragist movement all throughout New York's newspapers, billboards, and local shops. They organized public events such as a suffragist fundraiser baseball game between the New York Yankees and the Chicago Cubs. When the referendum was not passed in the 1915 election, Helen and the Empire Committee continued to raise money and push for the cause. There is one story that my family especially cherishes that goes as follows. At one of her dinner parties, a guest handed her a cash donation in an envelope, which she kept on her lap throughout the meal. However, when dinner ended, she realized she was missing one of the bills. She found the tattered remains of the missing cash next to her little white terrier dog. Determined as ever and quick on her feet, Helen gave the dog a dose of nausea-inducing syrup, waited for him to dispel his food, picked up the missing pieces, cleaned them, and taped the bill back together. Fortunately, her hard work paid off, and in the November 1917 election, the suffragist referendum was passed in New York, allowing New York women the right to vote in the 1918 election. This referendum demonstrated to the rest of the United States the value of allowing women to vote. After pooling all of her energy into the suffragist movement, her husband Ogden had a request. He said, "You are freed from your suffrage work and responsibility. The Tribune needs you. Come down to the office and work the paper's success out with me." She accepted her husband's offer, employing her trademark vigor into growing the Herald Tribune. During her illustrious career at the New York Herald Tribune, which spanned across various roles such as vice president of advertising to president, she was accredited by Time magazine for using her power to elevate other women. In Times magazine, "Votes for women is no longer an issue, but the flame of feminism burns as high as ever in Helen Reid's compact breast. Proud is she that no other metropolitan newspaper employs as many female executives." Helen Reid was a woman who, upon breaking her own glass ceiling, reached a hand downward to pull other women up through the ranks. Education was critically important to Helen Rogers Reid, and her love for Barnard College is one of the reasons that we are all here tonight. In an unpublished biography on Helen, author Louise Fitzsimons says, "A strong believer in education, particularly for women, and deeply conscious of what her own hard-won years at Barnard had meant to her, she repaid again and again over the years the sacrifices her family had made for her education. Throughout her lifetime, she financially sponsored the education of nieces, nephews, and grandchildren, all without them knowing. In addition to supporting her family, she was dedicated to developing Barnard College, the place that had given her lifelong friends, an unparalleled education, and her career. She was elected to the Barnard Board of Trustees in 1914, a position she would hold for the next 42 years, spearheading fundraising and development initiatives. Given her close relationship with Barnard College, it is no surprise that when Elizabeth was contemplating the future of the former Girls' Art Club, Helen worked alongside other female leaders in academia, such as Virginia Gildersleeve, to persuade her mother-in-law to convert the club into a center for college-aged women. Helen and Virginia envisioned a hub for university women, believing it would not only help foster French-American relations, but act as a sacred space for young women to engage in scholarly exchange and expand their worldviews. After the group successfully convinced Elizabeth Reid to reopen the space as a University Women's Club in 1922, Helen remained involved in the affairs of the program. She served on the board of Reid Hall throughout her life, eventually gifting the building to Columbia University in 1964. This gift was delivered with ample love and appreciation and a wink to that dean that had graciously sponsored her senior year tuition in 1903 under the stipulation that one day she repaid the college. By all accounts, it is clear that Helen Reid was a woman who kept her promises. Helen Reid stands as a symbol of opportunity, or Reid Hall stands as a symbol of opportunity through education, an initiative that all of you in this room have remained dedicated to. Over my time here the last couple of days, I found myself in awe of what you offer students. The privilege to extend their education beyond the confines of the United States, to learn from the beautiful city of Paris, and relish in its history. Though I have never met either of my great-grandmothers, I'm sure they would be deeply proud of Reid Hall and all of the work the university has done to keep its spirit alive and well these last 60 years. What an indescribable honor it is to be within these four walls tonight. Thank you.
So let me start by saying thank you. Thank you to everyone for coming tonight. Mary Louise, thank you for being here tonight. It's incredibly moving to have you here. And Brune and Meredith, thank you for all of your work and research on this project. We are going to have a time for a brief conversation between the four of us, and then we will open it up to questions. I'm sure there are many. Before we do that, let me introduce myself. I'm Marie Duzema. I work on special projects for the Global Center here in Paris. That means all of our civic engagement and journalism initiatives. And I also have the joy of hosting our podcast, our Reid Hall podcast called Atelier, which comes out every 2 weeks. And if you don't listen already, you really should be. It features all of the people who inspire us most at Reid Hall, people who are just passing through, people who spend more time here. It's really worth a listen. And in honor of the 60th anniversary of Reid Hall being gifted to Columbia, we are launching a special series tonight of 24 episodes dedicated to some of these women who were lost to history and who are now being brought back to light. So we have a brief teaser to really hook you on this new podcast, which we will play for you now. This is a podcast about the ghosts of Reid Hall. The friendly feminist ghosts whose presence is still felt within these walls, climbing the creaky staircases, gliding across honey-colored wooden floors and terracotta tomette tiles. There they are, painting in their ateliers, sunning themselves in the cobblestone courtyard, peering down from a drafty window beneath the eaves. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Reid Hall was a haven for women scholars and artists, long forgotten or ignored by history, as is so often the case. Each episode of this podcast will bring one of these women to life. You'll hear about her art, her science, her travel, her passion. You'll hear what it was that brought these women to Paris over 100 years ago, why they came to Reid Hall, and what they found. So come along, travel through time with us, meet our beloved ghosts, the women who helped create the very spirit of Reid Hall, a spirit that very much continues to flourish, if in different form, today. So, to further encourage you to listen to this podcast, there is a QR code in your program, so it's easily accessible to you. I do want to also thank the production team of the podcast, Charlotte Force, James Allen, and Anthony Valette. Thank you for all of your creativity. Mary Louise, if we could start with you. I will say on our behalf, we were absolutely gobsmacked and thrilled when Brune got an email from you this past summer. What was it that prompted you to reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually online just doing some family research, as sometimes I will do that. It's always fascinated me. And I stumbled upon this page that knew far more about my family than I knew, anyone in our family knows, and pictures I'd never seen before. And I was absolutely floored. So I said, I have to reach out to whoever is responsible for this, just to say, I have never seen any of these photos. Thank you so much for your very thorough research. I think that really speaks to how thorough their research was. And then I learned that there was this 60th anniversary celebration. And so Brune invited me to come over to Paris.
And how much did you know about Reid Hall growing up?
I hate to admit it, but I did not know much at all. I knew that there was a Reid Hall in Paris, but I didn't know very much. And my first time actually coming into this building was yesterday. And it has absolutely blown me away. It is such a special place, and I heard accounts from so many people saying that it was a really special third space, Brune. I know you often describe it as that, and it has absolutely confirmed what you have shared about it.
Meredith and Brune, a question for both of you. How did you dive into this enormous project?
So I came to Reid Hall in 1984. And, the very place, I think, already begs the question, why, why is there a well in the garden? What is that gate that's in the middle of this, the buildings here? So already that was something that was very, tantalizing, let's say. But, so I was young then, I was a baby. I told you I was 5. No, I'm teasing. So, and I had taken on this new job, which had to do with the undergraduate programs here at Reid Hall. And it took until 2018 before I even was able to dig into the history of Reid Hall. And so, really, I keep on saying the pandemic was fantastic for us because, we were able to really dig deep into the history of this place. But the thing that's also really important is that, newspapers were really very useful for us because there were no archives at Reid Hall, right? I mean, as you heard, Reid Hall went through so many different iterations, and in all those iterations, things were thrown out, I think, or squirreled away somewhere, right? So what really helped us was to be able to go through many of those newspaper archives, especially because many of the women who were here were socialites. And, you know, newspapers wrote about socialites. And so, you know, they followed them all over the place. So, voila, I mean, it was just really very exciting because, you know, you're always like looking for somebody's path and, you know, ferreting it out in different databases, let's say.
And so it is very much a never-ending project, correct? I'm curious to hear more about the obstacles you encountered. For instance, there were no archives here at Reid Hall, but also the surprises you found along the way.
You know, because Gallica and Retro News, because the BNF in France had decided to digitize all of its, or many of its collections and its newspapers, one day Meredith just typed into Retro News 4 Rue de Chevreuse, and lo and behold, she discovers a advertisement for the
Orthopedic Center.
which we had no
We had no idea.
no idea that this existed, right? So all of a sudden, going from a Dagotti porcelain factory to an orthopedic center was really very bizarre. And it was a great surprise. And so we dug in a little further into that. So, you know, serendipity was always at our side. And I think that's something that's really important in research. It's to be able to grab those opportunities that serendipity gives you, but being able to be critical as well, because, you know, newspaper archives, for example, can say a lot of things, but sometimes they're not the greatest things. But another thing that I think that's really important to know is that, you know, like I said, many of the women who were here were white Protestant women, and many of them came from the South at the very beginning of the Arts Club. And, you know, they brought with them the stereotypes and the problems that they had in the United States. And so, you know, even though it was a safe haven for many of these white women, it wasn't necessarily a safe haven for everyone, right? And for example, one young woman who had come from Philadelphia, who was a Black woman from a middle-class family in Philadelphia, when she applied to the club, she was accepted to come here as a resident. And when she arrived, the director said to her, "Oh, why didn't you tell me you were not white?" Right? And so, you know, and so the director told her, "Okay, go ahead and sit over there, you know, have a little bit of breakfast in the breakfast place." And in that breakfast place, there was a young woman from the South who then went to the director and said, "If you let her stay here, I'm leaving the club." And so this created a situation where this young woman was ousted from a quote unquote safe haven, which was not a safe haven for her. And I'm sure that there are other stories like this, but we haven't been able to really, you know, look into them. She later became one of the absolutely most phenomenal African-American artists. And go ahead.
Her name is Mita Fuller.
Mita Fuller. And what was I going to say about her in addition to that? The other thing that's so paradoxical is that she then also exhibited here at 4 Rue de Chevreuse, was a sculptor, and exhibited here, and in a kind of a paradoxical moment, you know, was able to come.
And was praised by Rodin for her skills, so.
Mary Louise, you shared with us some of these very personal stories and family lore of your great-grandmother and your great-great-grandmother. And for both of them, the pursuit of equal rights was very important. How did having these women as really icons in your family growing up shape you?
Yeah, I remember being a young girl hearing a story about Helen when she worked at the Herald Tribune in New York City. And though this is a small act, they always said she refused to use the segregated elevators. And that was a story that was shared with me, as I mentioned, as a young girl. And all of the stories of advocating for not only the underdog, marginalized communities, I think it was always ingrained in my head from a very young age. This is what your family stands for, and therefore this is very much what you should stand for. So I think it was always a tenet to strive for, and always to elevate marginalized communities. I think it really stood for that to me.
With this history project, you have, Meredith and Brune, you have brought these women much more into the forefront than they even were before, in terms of, all of these women of Reid Hall, but also especially Elizabeth Mills Reid, Rogers Reid. We talk about frequently sort of this relationship between past, present, and future at Reid Hall, and how much the vision of these two women has influenced what Reid Hall has become, and how much it is imbued in what we still do here today. Brune, you have been here for 40 years, and you will be here for 40 more. And so,
No way.
But
You have to pass the baton, okay?
I'm wondering if you can, Brune, tell us how you hope to see the legacy of these women carried forth into the future.
What a question, Marie. It's like, I'm hoping that the website that we've done, one of the reasons why we did a website is because we want to be able to upgrade it all the time, right? A book, you can't do that too. So every time we find new information, we add it onto the different profiles that we have done of these women, or, we correct things where we feel that we didn't, do things correctly. Enfin bon, at any rate, so the website for us is a way to be able to really foreground, carry forward these legacies that we all, benefit from here today. I think that many of the projects that we do here and are also in many ways inspired by some of the history of this place. And I think that that's something that we should continue to carry forward. And I think we do right now. And I think the fact that we've discovered the history of Reid Hall has also given us a greater oomph to be able to carry forth many of the projects that we do. I'm not sure if I responded.
You. No, oomph, that was perfect.
Okay,
Yes.
oomph.
I'd love to open this up to questions from the audience.
Puis-je parler en français? Bien sûr. Merci. Ce sera plus sûr. Moi aussi, j'ai une grand-mère qui s'appelait Marie-Octave Monod. Et
Oui.
Pardon?
Mais qui était très importante ici à Reid Hall aussi.
Justement, c'est
Oui.
pour ça que j'en parle, parce que c'est une contribution aussi à l'histoire de Reid Hall.
Bien sûr.
Elle est née en 1876 et elle est morte en 1966. Et une des grandes actions de sa vie, ça a été de créer l'AFDU, l'Association française des femmes diplômées des universités. C'était en 1920
Bien sûr.
et elle a affilié cette association, c'était une excellente idée, à la Fédération internationale des femmes diplômées des universités qui avait son siège à New York. Donc, elle a organisé des liens constants à travers cette association entre la France et les États-Unis. Et surtout, elle a eu la chance d'être acceptée par Reid Hall, qui a bien voulu faire ici le siège de l'AFDU. Donc, je crois que ça a duré encore, mais ça a permis aussi de contribuer au rayonnement, peut-être un tout petit peu de Reid Hall, mais beaucoup de l'AFDU, certainement. Il y a eu des conférences organisées conjointement, il y a eu des congrès de l'ensemble des fédérations, des associations œuvrant pour l'accès des femmes aux universités dans différentes capitales européennes et aux États-Unis. Des congrès qu'elle a organisés où elle s'est rendue également. Il y a eu de nombreuses bourses données en faveur des relations internationales, des échanges entre étudiantes, toujours pour les filles, n'est-ce pas? Et elle a aussi créé des foyers logements pour les jeunes étudiantes, y compris les étudiantes provinciales, ce qui leur permettait de monter à Paris. Et une ou deux fois, ces étudiantes ont été accueillies par Reid Hall. Donc, Dorothée Lee, c'est un nom que j'ai souvent entendu dans ma jeunesse.
Dorothy Lee was the director of Reid Hall for 40 years.
Exactement, et
Voilà.
notamment entre les deux guerres, c'est-à-dire au moment le plus important dans la vie de ma grand-mère. Donc j'ai eu la chance de disposer, et je vous en parlerai volontiers plus longuement, des archives de ma grand-mère, qui a tenu un journal depuis l'âge de 14 ans, faites-en autant jusqu'à 70 ans, qui a correspondu aussi avec son fils qui était trésorier des Nations Unies, donc qui habitait New York pendant 25 ans, et qui a beaucoup correspondu avec sa fille. Donc j'ai une mine en tant qu'archive. Moi, comme je suis historienne également, normalienne, que j'ai passé un an à Yale Université, j'ai eu cette chance, c'était un échange avec Normal Sup. Je me suis intéressée à ces archives et j'ai rédigé et publié l'année dernière la biographie de Marie-Octave Monod. Donc je ne vous dis pas tout sur elle. Elle a fait beaucoup d'autres choses, mais elle a notamment contribué à favoriser le rayonnement de Reid Hall et beaucoup de soutien de Dorothée Lee. Elles étaient grandes amies.
And I'm going to say this in English for people who don't necessarily understand French, but Marie-Octave Monod was also very important, first of all, to the building of the American Women's Club here, the University Club, because of her relationship to the International Federation of University Women. And so, you know, that club was really founded with the idea of creating the AFDU, like you said, you know, the Association Française des Femmes Diplômées des Universités, which is still at Reid Hall today.
Yes.
Yeah, they're still, you know, a member of Reid Hall, so they're one of the oldest members of Reid Hall, as a matter of fact. And, you know, they've done many, many wonderful things for women. And Octave Monod was also really responsible for helping also Reid Hall during World War II, when it was completely empty. The place was empty because all the women returned to the United States, and she was here working with her colleagues to try and find a solution to be able to make sure that this place remained outside of German hands. And so she is among the people who asked for the École Normale Supérieure des Jeunes Filles de Sèvres to come here. So at any rate, so yes, very important figure in Reid Hall's history, and we pay homage to her in our website, of course.
Merci. Et voici donc le livre que je vous donne. J'aurais déjà dû vous le donner pour les archives. C'est sa biographie qui a été publiée il y a moins de 2 ans.
Merci, merci beaucoup.
Et je parle de Reid Hall, bien sûr.
Oh. Avec une préface de Michel Winnock, oui, qui a été aussi très important à Reid Hall. Michel Winnock. La préface de Michel Winnock. La préface. Oui, oui, oui. Okay, okay. Thank you so much, vraiment. Merci beaucoup. Et puis, retrouvez-nous. Bien sûr.
We have another question. Thank you.
Yes, good evening. Thank you so much. I mean, I've heard so much about this project over the years, but tonight it was really amazing to hear how things have evolved. And with that, it's also the first time I really thought about Meta Warwick Fuller's life and the significance of her work. And it just occurred to me that although it wasn't mentioned, the dioramas and all of the things she did in Jamestown depicting African-American life, the fact that much of her work was lost in a fire. Her husband, a prominent neurologist, continued to really make sure to promote her work. And given that in the history of Reid Hall, I wonder, had there been any much thought to continuing to keep a relationship with the family, but also to find a way to support other women of color who are scholars or artists here in this space, because it was such a significant milestone for Reid Hall to have hosted her and her work.
Absolutely. I mean, today we have very much of a different perspective. I mean, it's much more inclusive than we were in the past, right? So we have Assa Traoré, for example, who is a person who has created an association called Génération Leaders. Assa comes over here to be able to build a leadership community among young Black French people. There's also, who is the other person who we're working with, Marie? Académie des Futurs Leaders also is working on that whole question of, you know, diversity. I mean, I hate to use the words diversity, inclusion, and so on and so forth, because they become so overused. But at any rate, it's very important to what we do here at Reid Hall nowadays. Absolutely. And then, of course, we have Mabula, who does an incredible amount of work with us, who does a whole series called Les Encres de l'Atlantique, where she puts into, how do you say that? Elle met en valeur. Elle met en valeur writers who have had, you know, transatlantic, absolutely, itineraries.
We also, for 2 years, have our displaced artist residency, which welcomes now 2 artists per year who have had to leave their countries due to war or political oppression. And that is also, I think, continuing in this legacy of focusing on education and opportunity, but fortunately in a way that continues to evolve and expand to a much wider community than previously. And there will be, I mean, I love that idea of doing much more to celebrate her legacy. There will be one episode entirely dedicated to her. She deserves so much more and so much recognition. Thank you for bringing that up as a possibility.
Just so everyone knows, the person who was talking here is the Dean of Undergraduate Studies back at Columbia University, the head of a center called Undergraduate Global Engagement. Shannon Marquez just thought that it would be important to know that she's here with us.
And a little bit further about, you know, how we might also partner to really distinguish an opportunity to support.
Absolutely. I mean, and if you know any member of that family, please let us know. I mean, we're always looking for information, you know, and like I said, serendipity sometimes, for example, tonight, is really always on our side. We've had people reach out to us just because they looked at our website, you know, so yeah. Not only the Reids, but other people as well, you know.
I love what just happened though, because it's like a public display of how things really work at Hall, which is what makes it so wonderful to work here, but also just to come in this space too, because I think people come up with ideas and the response is, let's try. Yeah. I saw one other question.
It's not a question and it won't be long, but I'm just very moved tonight. I've been in Paris over 33 years and there are millions of people and I just feel lucky to be here tonight. It's been an amazing evening. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you.